Hello, and my name is OscarTorrell.com, and I welcome your comments. This particular session is called The Bloodline of Jesus, and it has a couple of subtitles. The Bloodline of Jesus, The Bloodline of Man, and The Bloodline of God. And I'll pretty much divide this lesson into three parts. So let us get right into it. The Bloodline of Man. Well, for some reason or other, man has come to believe that he can develop a pure bloodline. In other words, without the help of God. Man, since the beginning, has wanted to make a man for himself. So we find in history men always trying to create a superior man or a pure man, as some said. And really all this is man in love with himself and not with God or leaning upon God. Yes, there was a bloodline developed in David when he became king, or when the kings then were ordered. And there was a bloodline also in the tribe of Levi, as they were the only ones directed by God to become priests. But outside of that, I'm going to cover then in several parts just exactly what was the bloodline of Jesus. You see, what I'm going to prove today is that God chooses who he wants, irregardless of the law, of Moses, irregardless of man or anything else. That God looks upon the heart of a man rather than the blood of a man, which has always been then the object of man. So let's get right into it. In the book of Matthew chapter 1, we have a very long lineage of people and men that go through all of this, and I'm not going to read it completely. You can read it in Matthew chapter 1. And where I'm going to start is I'm going to start with Abraham. I'm going to start from the beginning with Adam and Eve, but Abraham will prove my point enough, as Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. And I'm going to go through all of these all the way down to David and also to Solomon. Well, we got to lay a couple of foundation scriptures. And one of them is found in Exodus 13, where it says, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever is first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and beast, is mine." So number one, the firstborn was very important. He had certain privileges and rights under custom and also in the law of Moses. And in Deuteronomy 21 it says, "But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his." So there was another custom, and then later on added to the law, that the firstborn would get a double inheritance of the father. Whatever then the father had and whatever other children that he had, it first came to the firstborn by law and also by custom. Then because of this, there was a duty of the family. In Deuteronomy 25 it says, "If brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry unto a stranger, but her husband's brother shall go unto her and take her for him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband brother unto her. It shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name not be put out in Israel." Now this was a law that is applied also in the book of Ruth, and we find it later on when they try to trap Jesus. The Pharisees then go through that story that if the wife whose husband died married the brother and he died, and there was 7 brothers that died, then who shall be the husband in heaven? So this is the law that applies to this particular part of it, and it was important then that the wife's inheritance in God was through the husband. And so it was important who she married. And also that if she had no son, then it would be the duty then of the brothers to bring forth a son. But it was also realized that it was the first son that would be born would be not of the brother who married, but it would be of the husband that passed away. Important part of the law. So let's take apart this particular slide and work ourselves. First, across the top, we have Terah. And then from left to right, we have then 3 sons: Nahor, Abram, who became Abraham, and Haram. So let's first go down the left side of this slide and cover that. Nahor married Rumah, and he had 4 sons. Now his second wife, Milcah, was actually his niece. the one of the brother who died, Haram. And so Milcah then married then Nabor, her uncle. Now what's important there is the sons that are born right there on the left. I show you all the sons. And the very last son then is Bethuel. Now Bethuel has Laban and then Rebekah. And Laban has Leah and Rachel, which is going to become important in just the second part. So let us go down the middle. Abram, who became Abraham, marries Sarah. And then Sarah could not have children. So what she does is she gives her Egyptian slave servant onto Abraham and has Ishmael. Later on, God opens the womb of Sarah, and you see the line going all the way down the center to the bottom, and has Isaac, the son of promise, who then marries Rebekah. So they were first cousins, because in essence then Bethuel was a cousin, and then of course the daughter was a cousin also. Isaac has twins, Jacob and Esau. Now notice now I'm beginning to put certain names in red. And the reason they're in red is because those are in the lineage of Matthew chapter 1, so that you can identify as to who is chosen. So Isaac, under marriage, is the firstborn, but in reality was the second, because Hagar had the firstborn of Abraham, known as Ishmael. Isaac has Esau and Jacob. Esau is the firstborn, Jacob is the secondborn. But Esau sells his birthright to Jacob, who is now in red. And Jacob then goes to the land of his fathers and marries Leah and Rachel, which makes them second cousins. So this was the order that was there, as you can see, as we're keeping the bloodline of Jesus. So now let's go to the sons of Jacob. Jacob then marries Leah and Rachel, and their cousins, and Leah begins to have children. So she has, and I numbered them, 1, 2, 3, Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah. Judah's in red, is number 4, and then stops. Well, then Rachel gets frustrated and then gets her maidservant and gives on to Jacob, and Bilhah then has Dan and Naphtali of the maidservant. Leah then also gets angry and offers her maidservant and Zilpah to Jacob, and Jacob then has Gad and Asher. Well, now all of a sudden Leah begins to have children again, and she has number 9, Issachar and Zebulun on the left side. And now finally Rachel's womb is opened, and she has Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph is the one that's sold into Egypt, then by the brothers, he's number 11. And Joseph then marries an Egyptian woman and has 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, as you can see on the right-hand side toward the bottom. And now Joseph then goes to his father Jacob and says, take away my inheritance and give it to my 2 sons, who are half Egyptian. And so now we come into the tribe of Israel, Manasseh and Ephraim. That brings the count up to 13. Well, why does it always say the 12 tribes? Well, that's because one of the tribes, Levi, number 3 of Leah, is now become the priesthood, whose promise is God and does not receive a promise of inheritance of land. So he becomes the tribe in the middle, and then there's still 12 around him, a total of 13. But nonetheless, Manasseh and Ephraim now are half Egyptian. The sons of Judah, which was number 4, he then is chosen because of the sons of the first 2, and then Levi, of course, the sins of the first 2, and then Levi, of course, now is inheritance is God. We see now that Judah is the fourth born son of Leah. Judah marries Shua, a Canaanite. So it's not of the bloodline of Abraham. Shua bears Onan, and Shelah, Genesis 38. And then because of their sin, God kills off and Onan. Er's wife is Tamar. So remember that law in Deuteronomy? Well, now it is Judah's duty then to find then a husband of relationship, that Er's name not be put out in Israel. And so Tamar is not married. So what does she do? Well, she plays the harlot by the road. Judah comes by and then lays with Tamar. Well, it turns out now she gets pregnant, and the first son is Perez. So Judah then has children illegally, illegitimate, of his daughter-in-law, and has Perez and Zerah. So twice he went on to her. Perez is now in red. Perez is the fourth son of Judah and illegitimate, and the first son of Tamar. Well, according to the law of Moses in Leviticus 18, it says, "None of you shall approach to any that is near akin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord." And then it goes on to list all of the illegitimate or illegal marriages that now are transpiring in Israel. So under the law, both nieces, nephews, first cousins, second cousins are no longer allowed in the law of Moses to marry each other. So this is a law in the law of Moses, in which these marriages were no longer allowed. So from this point on, now there's a separation in family. And this is an important law to note, as I will bring up later on. So from Perez, you will see here, he has Hezron and Amuel. Hezron is the firstborn. He is in red and chosen. Hezron has 3 sons. And by the way, we don't know the wives, according to scriptures, of who they married, of whether they were the lineage or the bloodline of Abraham or not. But now the second son, Aram, is chosen and has Abimnad. Abimnad has Asham. Asham has Salmon. Salmon has Boaz. Now Boaz then brings us to the book of Ruth. And you will notice there, now whether they had more sons, we don't know, but we know of this one son that's pertinent to the bloodline that was in Matthew chapter 1. So that brings us to the book of Ruth. And we know from Ruth 1, you know the story. It came to pass that when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons, and the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. So what happened? There was a famine in the land, and Elimelech mortgages his land in order to travel in Bethlehem. Elimelech and his sons die in the land of Moab. Both sons marry, and one son married Ruth, the important character of the book. And she is a Moabitess. She is from the land of Moab. Who were the Moabites? Well, Moab was a son of Lot, who had an incestuous then relation with his daughter. The daughters then got the father drunk. The mother had turned to salt, and they fled from Sodom when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. They mated with their own father, and then therefore came the Moabites. So we know where they came from. And then Ruth is a Moabitess. Well, through a relationship there, Boaz marries Ruth. Again, Naomi knew the law of Deuteronomy, and she then claimed that one of the descendants of Israel marry then into Elimelech, so that Elimelech's name would not die in Israel. So Boaz marries Ruth, and that was the reason there was a little controversy there, because Boaz knew that the first son born of Ruth would not be his son. The firstborn son would be the son of Naomi, Ruth chapter 4, and the son of Elimelech. So from there, then we have born Obed. Obed then has Jesse. Jesse has 8 sons, and one of them is David, who is anointed to be king of Israel after Saul. But note then that David is the 8th son of Jesse. So now David begins to marry. And man, does he begin to marry. A Jezreelite, a Carmelite, a lady from Gashur, and then Hedith and Abidal and Elal, who were in Hebron. And he begins to have sons. Ammon, Chileab, Absalom, noted character, Adonai, Zephaniah, Ithrai. So he begins to have sons before he goes and be king of Jerusalem. So once he gets to Jerusalem as anointed king, then we have another list, and I have them there numbered. Shua and Shoab. And then number 9, I note that in green, is Nathan. And number 10 is Solomon, who was of the relationship with Bathsheba. Her firstborn dies because of God. And then Solomon is born when David goes back to Bathsheba and has her bear children again. And then we have other sons that are born, a total of 17. We really don't know who all these sons married, but nonetheless, they were the lineage of David. But the one that was chosen would be Solomon. Solomon then is noted in the descendancy of Joseph. Joseph, who married Mary and who bare Jesus the Christ. Mary, according to the book of Luke, is a descendant of Nathan, which was the 9th son. And that's where the split was. So both Joseph and Mary were of the children of David, the descendancy of David, through 2 different lineages, but nonetheless of David. Now, a bloodline of kings. David became a king, and this is where the king line was created. And so it naturally implies that every son to be born, somebody had to inherit the position of king. Now, the problem with a bloodline of kings is that you had to settle for a good or a bad king. And let me tell you that only 5 of the 45 kings did what was right in the sight of the Lord and led the people Israel astray. And many priests were hired to do the will of the people and the will of the kings rather than the will of God. And we know from 1 Samuel chapter 8 that when they requested of Samuel for a king or a bloodline of king, that God told Samuel, go ahead and choose it. They've rejected me. They have not rejected you. In other words, they rejected God to be king over them rather than that. They rather have a man over them and had them led astray. So I don't believe it was in the plan of God to have a bloodline of kings. But here we have it. God deals with it. Now, we noted then from all of these lineages that the birthright then was negotiable. According to the law and custom, it went to the firstborn. But Jacob bought it and went to the secondborn. Perez was the fourthborn and an illegitimate son. David was the 8th born of Jesse, and he was then of a descendant of part Moabite. Solomon was the 10th son, and more than likely was part Hittite. Why? Because the husband of Bathsheba was a Hittite who David had killed, and he would have married then into the Hittite people. So Bathsheba was more than likely a Hittite. So what does it mean by pure blood? Well, I believe that pure blood was a man-made term and redefined every time that a man took the throne or killed for a position. All of a sudden that man decided, I am of pure blood. I am privileged. I am great. So therefore, he started a bloodline with whoever was in power. But throughout history, how many bloodlines were killed? I mean, what happened to the bloodline of Genghis Khan? What happened to the bloodline of the Caesars? What happened to the bloodline of the Chinese dynasty? And on it goes. They were all killed off, and all of them believed that they were of a pure bloodline, but yet died in secession. So to develop a pure bloodline is absolutely ridiculous because it's whoever's in power. I mean, you take a look at Solomon. Solomon was in power, and he had 700 wives. He had wives of Egypt, of Pharaoh's daughter, of Moab, of Ammon, of Sidon, of the Hittites, and these all led Solomon astray. Upon his death, then his son Rehoboam, who was the son of an Ammonite, then comes to the throne. But he was not a righteous man. So what God did was he divided the kingdom To the north was Israel and 10 tribes, and to the south then was Judah and Benjamin. And that's the part that Rehoboam takes over. Then God gives the northern 10 tribes to a man by the name of Jeroboam to be king. He was the son of Nebat and Zeruiah. Nebat was a servant of the tribe of Ephraim. He was not of the bloodline of David or Solomon. He was a servant. And yet God gave the northern tribes to Jeroboam to be king. So let's talk a little bit about humanity and the results of intermarriage, since some people are going along that route and trying to find that route. Well, we know from study of genetics and we know from the study of biology that when humans begin to intermarry, certain genetic disorders are increased in humanity. Also, there's fluctuating facial symmetry. In other words, the faces obviously begin to look alike, and there's certain features that are developed in the face. Also, there's a low birth rate. There's higher infant mortality. There's slower growth rate. A person's stature becomes smaller. And there's loss of immune deficiency function. In other words, they're more susceptible to diseases. Well, this is then became known as inbreeding. And inbreeding has certain then biological terms. One of them is inbreeding depression. That is when the first generation that's to be born has some deformity, as we just pointed out. And so what happens is that in animals, they practice what is known as culling. In other words, the killing or bringing death to the unwanted outcomes. So that if you're breeding a certain type of dog, a cow, a horse, whatever you're breeding, then you just kill or cull. You cull whatever you don't want so that it doesn't continue in the breed. Now, this was known with the Greeks, who interbred a lot because they were building the superior soldier and the superior race. And they would just leave a baby to die out in the wilderness, leave them to the animals because of some deformity of their own acts. This is called genetic purging, so that you only keep the desired characteristics and are repeated. The Nazis did this, or were doing this and planning this, and they weren't the only ones. So they try to take away genetic weakness in order to bring out a stronger human being. Note that. So let's load at some history, some of the blood lineages. One of them was Ptolemy of Egypt. Remember that Alexander the Great died early, and then his kingdom was basically divided into 4 parts. And one of the parts was the general Ptolemy, and he then got Egypt. So he didn't intermarry with the local Egyptian people. And it is noted in history that there was 13 brother and sister marriages of the Ptolemy family. Cleopatra being the most famous. Yes, Cleopatra, the one that married Caesar and then later on married Mark Antony. That Cleopatra. And then in the Roman Empire, there was many royal families that practiced inter-family marriages of first and second cousins. It could have been one of the reasons why many of the Caesars could not have children. And many of the Caesars had to go and adopt either a cousin or a nephew or somebody in order to inherit then the throne after they became an empire and they became then the standing ruler. Many royal families of England and Europe had second cousin marriages, several first cousin marriages, because again, they were trying to keep the family wealth and the pure bloodline within certain families. And this is what was trying to be accomplished with them. And of course, there was some consequences biologically. One of them is known as the Habsburg family, dated more or less from about 600 years from 17 to 1700 AD. And they had many first cousin marriages. They divided into several groups, but the Habsburg family was noted for many physical, intellectual, and emotional genetic problems, and these were the royal families who were then constantly fighting with each other, constantly bickering with each other, constantly creating wars with each other because of their condition. One of the diseases that was noted was hemophilia, the bleeding disease, which was traced supposedly back to one of the royal families in England. Another one was mental retardation, as noted biologically. And King Charles II of Spain was noted in history for mental retardation, a very large jaw, swollen tongue, and eventually could not bear children, which is the reason that his bloodline finally died in Spain, is just because he could not bear any more children. So I had to mention this part too, Da Vinci and the Last Supper, the fresco that was there. And it was brought about then by a book known as we know it then. And this particular writer, Brown, brought this up. And the heresy that was brought was that Jesus Christ never died but married Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene, he said, could possibly even be in the picture of the Last Supper. But note 1 Corinthians 15. Now, if Christ be preached that he rose from the dead, how say among you there is no resurrection of the dead? And so we got this picture. See, Jesus had to die on the cross. Jesus then had to die for our sins as the Lamb, the sacrificial Lamb of God. But nonetheless, this is not the only point this heresy. There's books called Jesus and the Riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls, The Woman in the Alabaster Box, The Bloodline Holy Grail, and of course, the Da Vinci Code, Jesus' Scroll. And where this came from, that supposedly the Merovingian family and dynasty was of the bloodline of Mary Magdalene, because she married Jesus, they went off to France, and what actually happened was a pope didn't like the ruler that was in a particular area of France, evicted them, supported the Merovingian family, and said, well, the reason that they should be kings here in Frank, the reason they should be kings is because they are the bloodline of Jesus. But as I pointed biologically, what would that bloodline be? Who did Mary marry? Who did she mate with? And then how did they keep on marrying? Did they do what the Ptolemy family did in Egypt and kept marrying brothers and sisters to keep the bloodline pure? How deformed would they have been after 600 years of intermarrying, 700 years of intermarrying? Could they have even had children? Well, let's stick to this particular picture of the Last Supper. One of the things that Brown in the Da Vinci Code ignores is, where did Leonardo, for his painting, get the faces for this portrait, for this Last Supper? And the answer is from his own imagination. He didn't know what the apostles looked like. He didn't know what Jesus looked like. We don't have any pictures, historical record, accounts, portraits, statues, anything to note what the apostles looked like. All of the statues you see, all of the paintings you see, change from painter to painter. It is strictly out of the imagination of the painter, including Jesus. The only thing we're sure of is that Jesus had a beard. And why? Because the Bible says they pulled it when he was walking through the streets known as the Via Dolorosa. So other than that, this whole scene is totally, completely made up, and the femininity of John that could have been Mary is a hoax. It is strictly the imagination of those that want a bloodline of Jesus. Current day societies. This has been shown biologically again. The Pakistanis, as many foreign groups, when they move to another country, tend to stick to themselves. And so the Pakistanis in Britain, now they're in a country that keeps a lot of statistics, and they noted that 55% of them practice first cousin marriages. But we also note that they are 13 times more likely than the general population to produce children with genetic disorders. Exactly as biology approves. Islamic countries practice a lot of cousin marriages. The Amish of Ohio. Now they are obedient to the Bible. Irregardless of what happened with the royal families of Europe, they disobeyed the Bible and were blessed by the church and still had first and second cousin marriages. But the Amish of Ohio, who are practicing Christians, practice Leviticus in that they will not marry the second cousin or closer. But yet, 10% of the population of Ohio is Amish, but yet they represent half of the special needs children that are born in Ohio to the Amish. And 1 in 10 births of the Amish result in deaths, according to statistics that was taken from them. And then just for the fun, let's just see cousin marriages. You can look it up on Wikipedia and get a whole lot longer list. Johannes Bach married his second cousin. Charles Darwin married his first cousin. Albert Einstein married his first cousin, divorced her, and then married the second cousin. Mao Zedong, founder of the National People's Republic of China, married his second cousin. Carlo Gambino, the mob boss, married his first cousin. John Fitzgerald, grandfather to John F. Kennedy, married a second cousin. And so the list goes on and on as people try and keep a pure bloodline, but yet there are consequences. And the problem is, of course, in humanity, we do not practice culling as they do in animal husbandry. But let us note a little bit the other character, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, in his book on evolution, we always see it as The Origin of Species, but the title of the book is much longer. So you see here, it's a longer title. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So one of the premises or the basis of Charles Darwin was to prove that Charles Darwin and his Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Nordic people evolved better and more than all of the other monkey people. In other words, evolution is a man bettering himself without God. And that really was the basis, which was interesting because Charles Darwin, when he failed at medical school, his father then sent him to seminary to become a pastor and a minister. He failed at that and then turns out writing his book. So he had no degree in biology, any of the sciences, and he had no degree in the Bible. But yet, all of a sudden, he rebels against his Christian upbringing and rebels as God as creator. And how does he rebel? Well, to say that he brings about then social selection. That somehow, and you always notice that people who believe in this stuff, it's always their bloodline that's more evolved than everybody else's bloodline. And that's exactly what Charles Darwin was showing. Why do we know that? Well, because there was a science that was developed known as eugenics. And eugenics is the study and the practice of attempting to improve the genetic features of human populations through selective breeding and sterilization. And Charles Darwin's first cousin, Sir Francis Galton, in the 1980s, right after Charles Darwin, he became the father of eugenics, the science of eugenics. And he studied the upper classes, the well-off people of Britain. And he said, you know what? The reason is because our social genetic makeup is superior to everybody else's. Well, lo and behold, of course, you always choose your own society and put down the other societies. So he believed in the genetic superiority of Nordic, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon people. But really a bloodline, what happens? You see, once you take God out of the picture, then you can develop socially genetic anything. There was a scientist, a PhD by the name of Lila Ivanov, and he was one of the founders and discoverers who then enhanced artificial insemination in animals, of course. Then he got funded by the USSR in the 1920s and to create a mixed breed of ape and man. After all, man is just meat. He's just whatever we breed. and we're the better ones. But now the USSR, and we really don't know what reason other than maybe to build a superior soldier, according to some of the material that I read, was they wanted then Ilat Ivanov to practice his artificial insemination, and he actually went about and trying to inseminate an ape with human sperm, and then later on he tried to inseminate a human with ape sperm in order to create this ape man or ape person. I guess it was de-evolution. But let me go on. In the United States, because they believed so much in this eugenics that was developed, approximately 20 years before, 25 years before World War II, the United States actually developed what was known as the Heredity Commission. And it was a eugenic advisory group to the U.S. Congress. That's right, our Congress. It was founded in 1906 by Willett M. Hayes. He was Assistant Secretary of Agriculture and President and founder of the American Breeders Association. That's right, animal breeders. And the purpose of the commission was, quote, to investigate all proper means of influencing heredity to better the race. So let's get rid of God. We can become better, smarter, bigger, prider ourselves. The commission was also asked to study if, quote, a new species of human being could be consciously evolved. And this goes on and on. The Eugenics Record Office, the ERO, was then started by a man called Charles Benedict Davenport. Really bought into eugenics, the better race, Anglo-Saxon Germanic people. They were the people in 1911. And they aimed to create families of good blood. And they wanted to discourage, quote, vicious elements in crossbred American civilization. So the leaders of the eugenic movement directly were involved, and as laws came about, in about 60,000 sterilizations in the United States. And these were the unfit, according to Davenport. Davenport also strongly influenced the rise of Nazi Germany in their then thinking in the pure race, and actually directly influenced the Holocaust that would come about in Germany. And I'll speak just a little bit on that. Nonetheless, Congress kept going. And they actually passed Senate Bill 219, the Racial Integrity Act. March 20th, 1924, the Virginia General Assembly passed two laws about eugenics and race. That the act required that a racial description of every person be recorded at birth, and divided society into two classifications, white and colored. It defined race by the one-drop rule, defining as colored persons any African or Indian ancestry. So whether you're black or brown or anything in between, then you fell under the one-drop rule. And this law then forbidded you to marry. It could actually become a felony for you to marry a person outside of your race. Well, Hitler picked up on this, and he was trying to develop the Aryan race. And this was part of the work of Arthur de Gobineau, and he argued that the Indo-Europeans represented a superior branch of humanity. In other words, they left their ape ancestry faster than anybody else, so everybody else was monkeys except them. They were of the purer blood. Nazi Germany believed that they were of the Aryan race and therefore the master race. So the reason you have to bow down to them is because they're of pure blood. Well, it turns out that Persia believed in Hitler, and they had a common enemy that Hitler was going after, Israel. So they bought into it, and they just figured that Persia, which became Iran, or in their language, Aryan, which were people of the northern areas of Asia Minor, bought into it. But of course, the Nazi Germans, they believed totally different. Somebody that was Aryan, somebody that was superior, that was not from the northern areas of Asia Minor. But nonetheless, Persian bought into this because they then became Aryan, or Iran. But interestingly enough, in World War II, the Japanese believed in social Darwinism also. And they allied with Germany. Why? Because the Japanese believed they were of the superior Asian race, that their bloodline should be ruling over all of Asia because they were superior. I don't know what they were going to do with when finally whoever won, but if Germany and Japan would have won, I guess they would have had to prove then they were superior. But you see, really under God, it is in the heart. It is not in the blood. And a believer of God is not in the blood. Matthew 15 says, these people draw nigh unto me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. So we begin to realize and now come to a better understanding of John chapter 1. So I want to quote it to you, but I want you to take into mind my first part of my presentation and the second part of man's superiority of himself. And now in that light, let's read John 1:12. For as many as received him, Jesus Christ, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe in his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of God, the will of man, but the will of God. Let's try that again. If you're a believer of Jesus Christ, if you have received his Spirit, then you are born not of blood. In other words, I left my parentage. We were from Texas. We are of a Hispanic descendancy. All of that has now been gone away. We are not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh of my father, my mother. I am not of the will of man, but by his grace and by his Spirit, I am born of God. I am born again. So let that sink in a little bit. Now this study goes on further, but due to time consequences, I just want to note, especially for those of you that might be preachers or teachers. You see, when a person receives the Holy Ghost, Acts chapter 1, even in Acts chapter 1 it says, but you shall receive power after the Holy Ghost has come upon you, and you shall be witnesses. They received that power of the Holy Ghost. Luke 24:49, behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but wait in the city of Jerusalem until you receive this power. And what was it for? Galatians chapter 3. Number 1, to become children of Abraham, who were children of the promise, children of the faith and the promises of Abraham. When we accepted Jesus Christ, then we accepted the blessings of Abraham that came upon the Gentiles through Jesus Christ. Galatians 3:17. And we become the seed of Abraham. Galatians 3:29. And heirs according to the promise. So we are heirs. We're adopted sons. We are brought into it. We are children of adoption. We become then legal heirs and firstborn. We receive the double portion. We receive the inheritance of the resurrection. All of this is wrapped up into the consequences of accepting Jesus Christ. For we are not born of blood, but we are born of the Spirit of God and not of the will of man. God bless you. You can contact me at www.terrazasministries.com. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think. God bless.